So when we went over the article in the Telegraph, their main claim was that no Brexit promise had ever been broken. Had ever been broken. That in reality, everything was all hunky dory. Brexit was going, completely fine, chugging along well. Any real problems of Brexit? Well, no, that was just the pandemic, and we've got that war in Ukraine going on. Those are far more deal to do with our current economic problems, and not the fact that again it's the Tories pushing this crazy economic idea, pushing Brexit, potentially causing a trade war in the not too distant future, because Liz Truss has threatened very quickly to trigger Article 16, which could throw the whole trade and cooperation agreement into question if she decides to follow through on that, because the EU will follow through. It has no problems causing a trade war. Will it affect the EU and Ireland? Yeah, but not as much as it will us. There will be maybe a short-term hit for Europe, but it won't be a long-term hit. It'll be far more economically damaging to us. Not only that, but it's also very likely that the US will join in as well, because a lot of the Brexiteers' dreams are that somehow, if we do this crazy nonsense, that the US is going to sail in and bail us out. But if you've been paying any attention to what the US has ever been saying about Brexit, they don't really care. They're far more interested in gaining access to Europe than they are of us. This whole idea of the Atlantic Bridge has fallen into the sea since Brexit, and Brexiteers can't even admit that, well, that's the case. So, on to today, another broken promise of Brexit. But before we do get into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So over we go to The Independent, covering this with the title of Government Scraps Plan to Enforce Human Rights with Brexit Trade Deals, Leaked Letter Reveals. The government is no longer planning to use its Brexit trade deals to spread and enforce human rights around the world, a leaked letter from the International Trade Secretary has revealed. Writing to MPs, Anne-Marie Trevelyan has said that human rights would be kept out of trade deals, and that she believed that free trade agreements are, quote, not generally the most effective or targeted tool to advance human rights issues. This dramatic change in approach seems to come as the UK is attempting to try and sign a deal with the Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, all renowned for their poor human rights records. Last October, Mr. Trevelyan told the House of Commons that trade was, quote, will not come at the expense of human rights, and the talks on free trade agreements would create an opportunity to open discussions on such issues. As early as October of 2020, Liz Truss, who is expected to become Prime Minister next month, gave a landmark speech in which she said the UK's values-driven trade policy would be used to spread our fundamental values, such as human rights, around the world. But cracks have started to appear in this approach, and last June of this year, MPs raised concerns after the government quietly dropped human rights and rule of law from the list of proposed objectives in trade deals with the Gulf Cooperation Council. This week, the International Trade Secretary wrote back to the MPs and spelt out a very different policy from the one the government has previously advocated, saying the UK is a leading advocate for human rights around the world, and the government remains committed to the provision of the universal human rights, she said in the letter dated the 21st of August, seen by The Independent. The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office leads the effort with the UK government and is undertaken by separately to the negotiations on free trade agreements. While aspects of trade policy can be provided with the opportunity to address other issues of bilateral relationships, free trade agreements are not generally the most effective or constructive tool to advance human rights issues. This revelation provoked anger and reaction from human rights campaigners, who've said that ditching the human rights protection for free trade deals would give succor to autocrats. They said the response to this trade secretary confirms our biggest fears, that human rights will be paid to lip service in the upcoming trade agreement with the Gulf, said Soiled Ahmed Andoui, director of the advocacy in the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy. The government shamefully refused to include or even mention human rights in their trade deals, despite dealing with some of the most abusive states on the planet. The bottom line is Gulf dictators will be confidently reassured when it comes to doing business with the UK, and human rights will be left completely off the table. Peter Falk, of Amnesty International's UK Economic Affairs Director, said that the government was sending a very terrible message to other countries about how little the UK appears to value human rights and freedom when trade deals are at stake. Any notion that trade can somehow be cordoned off from human rights ignores issues and the grubby reality that multinational corporations all too often profit from lax labor laws and conditions amounting to modern slavery in widespread environmental harm, he said. Once again, we appear to have a trade policy which runs counter to the UK's stated foreign policy goals and wants championing for openness and free speech, reducing the conflict and environmental degradation, and ending all forms of modern slavery. Many free trade agreements around the world, such as the one the UK signed with the EU, include provisions to ensure that countries uphold basic human rights standards and have formed several clauses to make them legally enforceable. And with their ethical dimensions, the clauses are intended to make sure that countries cannot undercut each other by violating rights and allowing exploitations, for instance, with the de facto slave labor. Yet, the UK, despite signing free trade agreements with countries around the world to illustrate what it says are the benefits of leaving the EU customs union, human rights are a sore point for some of the countries who Britain wants to make deals. Last year, when he was Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab told officials that restricting trade laws because of lower human rights standards would mean that Britain was not going to do many trade deals with growth markets of the future. So, again, this goes to show you what their true nature is. We don't really care about human rights. Sure, we'll pay lip service to it and we'll say, that's a stated foreign policy goal. But when it comes down to it, we really don't care. And that's the shocking part about this, that they're willing to do these deals. And unfortunately, that is going to lead to a lot of exploitation. And you may remember back in the 90s where there were a lot of, boycotts advocated for some markets because of their rights of human rights abuses. I have to wonder if we're going to have to reset up these types of boycott goods for goods from Saudi Arabia again and Bahrain and things like that. I wonder if that's what we're going to have to do. The shift in the government policy is stark when compared with the statements by ministers earlier on in their quest for free trade agreements. In October of 2020, Miss Truss, the then Trade Secretary, gave a landmark Chatham House speech titled Britain's Vision for Values-Free Trade Deals. She said that Britain was learning from the twin errors of values-free globalization and protectionism, that the government was instead rooting for an approach for global free trade deals on the values of sovereignty, democracy, and the rule of law, and fierce commitment to high standards. In the controlling our trade future, we will work with the like-minded democracies to support freedom, human rights, and the environmental, while boosting enterprise and lowering barriers to trade, she said. The UK did not leave the European Union to have another country's values thrust upon it. We support the right of globalization based on shared values as we help lead the fight for free markets, free societies, human rights, and a greener world. Ms. Truss then went on to say that values driving our newly independent trade policy are well known. Our friends know how strongly freedom is delivered and driven in the UK's national story. Therefore, we can think back to the historic achievement of human rights under the Magna Carta, the abolition of slave trade, or the development of free market economies, he said at the time. The British people care decently about fairness, decency, and liberty. We can spread our fundamental values, freedom, democracy, and human rights, while protecting our natural environments of the future by working with our friends across the world. Even as recently as October 2021, the trade policy appeared to at least pay lip service to this, and it was a key part of the trade negotiations. When asked by Labour MP Cat Smith what recent discussions she had had with the UK trade partners on inserting clauses on human rights in future trade deals, Mr. Bellion said this: "The governments are clear that more trade will not come at the expense of human rights. The UK will continue to show global leadership in encouraging all states and upholding international rights and obligations, and to hold to account those who violate those rights. By having stronger economic relationships with partners, we have given the opportunity to open discussions on a wide range of issues." Answering another question from Tory MP Peter Bone about what free trade agreements would help improve human rights in the supply chains, Mr. Trevelyan said this: "It is important that we make sure that we not only use the power of the trade deals to build these relationships, as I said, but given our businesses that want to work globally throughout the supply chains, the best tools and protections that might be needed to ensure that they have the authority that comes with countries, and when the improvement of these positions and the supply chain workforce are indeed the protection of other human rights is critical." When asked to comment on this, Trevelyan's leaked letter, the government spokesperson said this: "The UK is a leading advocate for human rights around the world, and the Foreign Office, the current Foreign Office and Development Office leaders, efforts within the government. We will continue to encourage all states to uphold international human rights obligations." So you've given up a way to actually help enforce those and build those rights when you say you're not going to put this in the trade deals. So how are you going to hold Saudi Arabia, again, a well-known user of almost slave labor conditions? What are you going to do? It doesn't say this at all, and this is so worrying. So Sarah Onley, the Liberal Democrats business spokesperson, said it was crystal clear how little Conservative government actually holds the respect for human rights on the international stage. She said, after failing to guarantee British standards on animal welfare and environmental protections in the FTA with Australia, the government is now sinking even lower, set to finalise a trade deal with the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and appears to make no reference to their abysmal human rights record. She added that this should be set a minimum set of standards for the benchmark and future trade deals, including human rights and the conflict, oppression, environmental, labour and safety standards. Of course, this was going to happen. Of course. Why? Because we're desperate to do trade deals. That's what we always said. Our government was going to be desperate to trade deals, and it doesn't matter, standards, safety, human rights, out the window. Out the window. And it's so stupid that the government thinks that it can't help to bring in and advocate human rights and labor standards and safety through these trade deals, because it happens all the time with this type of stuff. And now you're going to end up, I guarantee you are going to end up with stories in the future with companies being uncovered for using slave labor from Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Of course, it doesn't matter whatever happens, because like I say, they want to get these trade deals and say, oh look, we've got all these trade deals, aren't they all wonderful, while trying to hide what these trade deals actually say and do. Of course, the free trade agreement with Australia completely destroys our standards and animal welfare, whereas Australians will not have to follow any of those rules while importing their stuff over to here, and they will import that stuff over here at huge volumes, which will damage our farmers. You then have possibly the Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain producing stuff with those slave labor exploitation, all that stuff going to come over here. So much for all those ethical trade deals. Yet another Brexit promise broken. So with that, as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.